Hey everyone, welcome back. In this one we're going to finish off our little segment on database triggers by completing our work on whenever an address or whenever the contact information changes that the list type customer, our pipe business entity record changes. Okay, so remember last time we did that with the name. So when the name on the actual business entity changes, then the backend trigger runs and makes a change to the list type so that information is synced up. So obviously we need to do the same for the address and for the contact name information, because if you remember on our little UI page, let's have a look on here, we had an address and we had first name and last name. So let's go back into our backend workflows and let's do this. So again, simple, we just do new database trigger event, and this time it's going to be on the address type. So we're going to be looking for a change on the address record. Okay, so let's just fill these in to keep ourselves consistent, and we will just call this update address. Okay, we'll just leave it like that for now. And if you remember, the first thing we want to do is to make sure that this doesn't get triggered if it's a new address record. So therefore what we need to do is to say address before change is not empty, and then we can put the rest of our conditions, which essentially is checking on the address field within the address type and seeing if it's changed. So all that we do there is we can say then and address before change address, the address field is not address, is now address field. So in other words, it's an existing record and the actual address field information has changed. Okay, and then we do exactly what we did with the other one. We're then going to create our own API workflow, and I'm going to set that up again, and we're going to have, it's under APIs, isn't it? Okay, and then it's going to be update address. We don't want it public. Okay, back in our trigger then we'll then make sure that we call this. Okay, and it's going to be update address, and it's going to be the current date and time, so it triggers right away, and we can ignore that, so it's going to get triggered, and so we can now work in our address. And so what we need to do then is simply pick up the information from the address and then place it into our pipe business entity, our list type. And so simply we can just do make changes to a thing. So we've got to go and find our list type record to update first and foremost. Okay, so what we do a search for, and then we can say it's the pipe business entity, and then we need to add a constraint. So what we're looking for is the business entity that is linked to the address. So where we grab that from basically is going to be equal to oh sorry, we missed a step. Okay, my mistake, of course. Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself, shall we say. So we do need to pass in, obviously, the address, the saved address, the new address change. We do need to pass that into our workflow. So what we can do there is add a parameter. Okay, and we can say address. Okay, and then within here we can then pick that up. Let's pass that in actually before we do that. So in here we're going to need to then say address now, so the address after it's changed, after the change has been made. Okay, and then we can say that it's going to be the address and it's going to be the business entity. So when we've made the change on the address, if the address has changed, it will come into here, and then it will go and look for the business entity that's on that address to find the list type. And then when we've done that, all we've got to do then is, well, we need to select the first item because that's the only one it will find, and then we can just say that we want to update the address on that. Okay, the address is address, and that's the address taken care of. We can forget about that whenever the user updates an address. We can just do that. So let's do the same thing before we test it. Let's test it all together. Let's do the contact name, first name and last name. So we'll do the same thing. We'll add a new trigger, and let's just call this update contact. contact, and it's gonna, let's put it in red and stick it in the right folder for later on. And again, we're going to make sure that this is not a new record. Okay, and then we need to say, and this is why I'm actually going to put this in a new parentheses. By the way, if you haven't got this where you've got the parentheses being shown here, if you haven't got that on there, I think it's really important because it enables you to put much more complex conditions on your system. And before the end of this video, I'll show you how to switch that on. So what we can do there is to say and that the contact before change first name is not contact now's first name. Okay, and then we're going to say or the contact before change last name is not contact now's last name. Okay, and then we don't want another and on there, so let's get rid of that. Okay, it still kept it there for us. Okay, so because we got it in parentheses, you see, we can make sure that this is separated from that. So primarily what we want to do is say if this is a new record, we do not want to go any further in through this particular condition, but the or condition has to remain separate, and that's why it's important to have the brackets so that the or condition doesn't get itself in a muddle with the and condition. Okay, and the parentheses feature lets you do that, so make sure you do switch that on, which I'll show you about shortly. Okay, so all that we're doing there is say it's not a new record and either the first name is changed or the last name is changed, and really it doesn't matter, to be honest with you. Once we get in there, whether it has changed or not, it really makes no odds. All we're doing is to make sure at least one of those has changed. And one thing I will mention here is it is important that you don't put too many conditions in this. Okay, and when I say conditions, I mean complex conditions, because remember, every time that a contact is updated, whether it's a new record or whether it's an existing record or whatever it may be, okay, is that this gets evaluated. And if you've got complex things going on here, then you can imagine that's going to take up a lot of server resources. So if you've got a condition such as this where you're just checking if it's a new record, don't do it. Put that at the first bit, because then if it doesn't meet that condition, Bubble doesn't even go on to do these next things. And so you're just saving that little bit of computing power on the back end. Okay, I don't want to get too much into that right now, so let's crack on. So then we're going to then add a new API workflow, and we're going to call this one update contact. Okay, we don't want it public again. We do need a parameter, we'll remember that this time, contact, and it's going to be of type contact. Okay, and let's just stick these as we normally did to be consistent. Okay, that's set up. So back in our trigger, we can then call that. Okay, and it's going to be update contact. Schedule it for immediately, and the contact is going to be contact now. Okay, right, we're all ready to go, so we can now work in our update contact. And again, we just do a similar thing to what we did before. We need to make changes to a thing, and that thing is going to be, do a search for the pipe business entity, and then we need to grab that, the business entity. We need to make sure that we're updating the right list type record for the right business entity, and the way we do that is simply by checking on the contact, and that's business entity. Okay, and then we also need to say first item, because there's only going to be one that matches that, and then we can then say that the contact first name is equal to contact first name, and then contact last name is equal to contact last name. Okay, and so that will do the job for us perfectly nicely. There is one more condition I want to go through, I want to discuss, but we've got our main triggers there that will deal with it when we add the record, which is this one and this one, and then when they update the address, which is that one, and when the address change the name on the business entity, which is that one, and then the contact. Okay, so we've got the trigger and the workflow that gets executed with that trigger. So let's give that a go. all of our front end stuff is already done. So what we'll do then is we will change this one. So we changed the address yesterday, so let's say that's Ridgemount House instead of Ridge, and let's say we've got a name wrong, and a name is Sarah, I don't know, Sarah Wallaby. Okay, so we changed it to Ridgemount House and Sarah Wallaby, so let's see if that triggers everything that we need. Okay, give it a second for the back end triggers to kick in. There we go, Ridgemount House, Sarah Wallaby. Okay, and that means now we can, as I said before, set up and forget. So we don't need to worry about that anymore. Okay, now just one example, or something that we will need to do going forward, but perhaps is a little bit early now. And that is, let's say for example, we're relying on the fact that, where are we? Let's have a look in here. We're relying on, do you remember this primary contact and primary address? Because we want them to be allowed to have as many addresses, many contacts. So what happened, for example, if they go in and change the primary address? So let's say you've got multiple addresses and they change which address is the primary address. We need that to update on our business entity list class, list type, because that stores the physical address, which will always be aligned with what the primary address is. Okay, now we haven't got a facility on the front end to add multiple addresses, so I won't be able to test this. It's a little bit hypothetical, but let's have a look how we would implement that. So again, we would just do another trigger. Okay, and let's call this update primary address. We don't actually need to put the dashes in for these because they're explicitly called. Okay, and what we need to look at, we're looking at the business entity here because we don't really care about the address record. What we're looking at, what we need to check on is the primary address field on the business entity. Okay, and we'll do the usual stuff. And this time what we want to do is, we need to make sure that it's not a new record, so we put that in there first. Okay, it's not empty, and then we need to say, and the before change primary address is not business entities now primary address. So they've changed the address from one thing to another because that's a reference to a record rather than a value, so quite clearly they've changed that. Okay, so then we can do our usual thing. We need to create our new API workflow. Okay, and we will call this update BE primary address. It's not a public workflow. Cyan and the API, and the parameter that we need to add in is the business entity, so that we can read the now value from there. We could just pass in the primary address. Actually, we could do that. So let's do that actually, rather than passing the whole record. Let's just say we can just pass in the address. Okay, and that is going to be an address type. Okay, yeah, so rather than just pass in the entire business entity, let's just pass in the address that we want. So in here we then need to call that. Okay, update primary address, and the schedule date, again we're going to call that right away. And the address is going to be business entities now primary address. Okay, so we're just passing in the new primary address that it's been changed to. Okay, so in our primary address, what we can then do is, we now have the address, we have the address details on there, and so we can do that. And this is actually a much easier way of doing it than the way I was actually just about to do it. So sometimes you have these little flashes of inspiration. So okay, so the thing to change is not the address. Actually, we need to do a search for, and we need to say the pipe business entity, and then we're going to say is where the business entity is equal to whatever's on the address, which is business entity. Okay, again we need to just say first item, and then we can change the field and simply say the address for this is now the address's address. Okay, and so it's very similar to the other one in that, you know, we've updated the address. It's so similar, we didn't even need to do this. In fact, what we could do is we could just run this one instead, which is just going to get, we're passing in the address anyway in here, so we may as well just run that one. We didn't actually even need a second workflow, so we'll delete that one, and all we have to do there, this one will be empty now. We've deleted it, and we just say address, and yeah, that will work perfectly well. So we can't test that because I don't have a facility for you to add more than one address and to be able to change those addresses, which address is the primary, but you get the picture. So it's just a case of just working through identifying where the triggers need to be, what needs to get updated, and then you can work from there. So anyway, I hope that helps. Let me show you this. So in settings, where are we? Under versions. Okay, you've got this experimental features option here, and there's one that says expression parentheses. Okay, automatically add parentheses to all dynamic expressions in the editor. This feature lets you add to any part of a dynamic expression, indicates where to apply a piece of dynamic expression. If you're not really into programming or anything, parentheses in expressions are really important, especially in maths and things like this, in terms of which order that they get executed in and how the logic is interpreted. Before this was introduced, it was quite difficult to put quite advanced, even sort of fairly basic ones, to be honest, like we've just done the and the or. That wouldn't have worked before. We would have had to have two different work steps, and we just would have made the whole thing a lot more complicated. Whereas now you put this on, it adds the parentheses, and then it knows in what order to evaluate that expression. You don't need to think about it too much. You'll know when you need it, when you need it. But definitely, I would advise ticking that. To be honest with you, they introduced that. Where was it? April last year, April 2022. I don't know what we did without before that. We found a way around it, but it's just a great feature. Why it's not found its way yet into the main build and it's still considered an experimental feature, I don't know, because I'm recording this on the 20th of January 2023, so it's been almost 9 months. So hopefully soon it will find its way into the main build because it is such a useful feature. Anyway, that's enough from me in this one. Hope you found that useful. I think that kind of covers database triggers. We'll move on in the next one. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with me again. Please like and subscribe. It really helps me get more views, which keeps me motivated. If I see people viewing it and subscribing, then it makes me motivated to actually believe I'm making a bit of a difference with these videos. So if you can do that, that would be absolutely brilliant. So take it easy. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next one.